Hey there everybody, I'm Robin and today I'm going to be reviewing Sword of Destiny, which is the second book in the Witcher series of books by Andrzej Sapkowski. Yeah, let's get into it. Plot and premise. Although The Last Wish and Sword of Destiny are crammed with short stories, they do have a common thread running between them, and that ends up sort of becoming the main thread of storyline that I believe will continue through the Witcher series of books. So it's just worth noting that sort of, although you can kind of read this book on its own, it's worth reading The Last Wish first. But that said, this is a spoiler-free review, which includes not spoiling The Last Wish. All in all, there are 6 short stories in this book, and we start out with The Bounds of Reason, and this is the one that they actually adapted for the Netflix TV series. There's some others later on that they adapted parts of for the Netflix series, but this is one that I believe got its own episode. I think this is probably the weakest story of the lot, though. It didn't do a great deal for me, but basically the premise is that you follow this old guy who asks Geralt to sort of accompany him along on this sort of dragon hunt, basically, and that's sort of the premise of the story. I won't go too much more into it than that, because spoilers. The second short story is called A Shard of Ice, and it kind of follows Geralt and Yennefer, and I'll get into characters a little bit more in a little bit, but it sort of is more about their relationship, and also there's another sorcerer called Istrid who also loves Yennefer, and it's sort of like a bit of a love triangle type thing story. And again, it was kind of a weak one for me, but yeah, after this one it sort of picked up quite a bit. The third story is called Eternal Flame, and it's about how to put this, sort of about doppelgangers. So there's these creatures throughout the Witcher world called Dopplers, and they can basically take on the form of another person or creature as long as they're around the same size. So for example, like if the Doppler was the size of a human, it couldn't disguise itself as a mouse or anything like that. But it's quite interesting actually, sort of the level of detail that goes into this chapter in terms of talking about how these Dopplers work, and in terms of how they not only take on the physical properties of a person or thing, they also take on the mental properties as well. So they actually, like, if they take on a person, then they pretty much become that person, because they take the mental attributes of them as well, which is quite interesting, because then it's like, how do you actually tell the difference between what is a Doppler and the original person? But it's an interesting story, this one, where the Doppler sort of takes on the form of a merchant, and that's as much as I'll say there, but very interesting story. The next story is called A Little Sacrifice, and it's kind of got 2 subplots going on at the same time. One of them is about this duke that's trying to woo a mermaid, and that one pretty much takes inspiration from the Little Mermaid story, but it never sort of goes the way that you think it is. The other subplot is where Geralt starts to get emotions for this female bard, and it's quite interesting because, like, you sort of feel like he's warming up to her, and then she warms up to him, and it's surprisingly emotional. So yeah, that's also a really good story. Then the next story is The Sword of Destiny, which is the title of the book. It's probably I'd say it's probably not as important as the next story, but it leads up to it. So this one I think actually connects more to the next story than the others actually did. So this one is sort of about Ciri and Geralt. Ciri is a child that is sort of very linked to Geralt, and that's sort of based from the Last Wish book. So if you want to know more about that, definitely go read The Last Wish. You should do that anyway. But they come across some dryads, and it's all about sort of Geralt building a relationship with Ciri, as well as sort of trying to get out of this sort of situation that they find themselves in with these dryads who don't really want to let Ciri go. Yeah, it's a very interesting story. And then the last story is the one that sort of strikes me as being sort of more in the Netflix series, is a story called Something More. And there's a lot about destiny, and that's sort of like threaded throughout both of these books, is the idea of destiny, and sort of how Geralt is very skeptical of destiny, but he sort of starts to sort of warm up to the idea a bit more. And in this story he learns a bit more about Nilfgaard and their intentions. And Nilfgaard is basically this kingdom that's sort of up and coming and rising and sort of taking places over unexpectedly and quite fast as well, actually. And then we end up meeting Ciri again as well. Atmosphere and setting. If you're not familiar with The Witcher already, it's heavily based on Polish folklore in a kind of medieval setting, and it's got monsters, loads of monsters, and a lot that you will know, a lot that you won't know. So like it'll contain things like vampires, werewolves, and also it'll contain quite a few that you won't ever have heard of before, because either it will be sort of Polish folklore, or it will just be sort of ones that are made up completely for the book. Also, some of the stories contain elements that you might find familiar from other stories. For example, the story A Little Sacrifice contains a sort of sub-story about a mermaid and a duke, and it's a lot like the Little Mermaid story. So things happen like, you know, he's trying to woo her, she does gain legs, and there's talk about sort of potentially losing her voice, but none of it plays out the way that you sort of think it would based on sort of the Little Mermaid. But the big takeaway here is that these things aren't huge, and they're never sort of the main point of a story. They're always like a bit of an aside. I assume just to make you feel a bit familiar with some sort of familiar story within the bigger story. The world that the characters inhabit is brutal and unforgiving and full of corruption, and you always feel like the protagonists have to tread carefully, especially when they're dealing with like a lord that sort of is flouting their power, or king or queen. And it just makes it all the more satisfying when you see the characters in a situation where they can get away with saying some things that, you know, really they would be punished for saying otherwise. It is worth mentioning that it's not the darkest fantasy. It is dark, but I would say that it's not going to leave you feeling battered and bruised at the end of it. The characters do have downtime from time to time, and there are light-hearted moments that will make you smile, so don't expect to come out of the book feeling really depressed or anything like that. Characters and relationships. First of all, let's talk about Geralt. He's our main character that we follow all the way through both the first books, and he's pretty much the point of view character, I guess, throughout the whole thing. And he is known as a Witcher, and a Witcher is someone that is usually an orphan, and they're usually taken by another Witcher at a young age and gone through a mutation process called the Trial of Grasses. And this basically makes them stronger, heightens their senses, and I believe allows them to use rudimentary magic, and all of this sort of makes them perfect monster killing machines. And in this world there's a lot of monsters that need slaying, and so that's basically their job. So Witcher will sort of just go from town to town, sort of taking on contracts, and that's basically what Geralt is. He's a monster hunter. What I find that makes Geralt interesting though is that although he's hired to kill monsters and takes on most jobs, he has a moral code that he sticks by. and he will refuse to kill certain creatures if they're harmless or sentient, only really attacking if others are going to get hurt as a result. So I really like that he has that sort of moral code. As a Witcher, he's not really understood by most other humans, and he's kind of held at arm's length by humanity in general. Because although he's technically human, he's still a mutant, right? And he kills monsters I guess it sort of makes people think, what kind of monster is able to kill those monsters, So people basically treat witches, and Geralt is no exception to this, as kind of like a necessary evil. There are some people that treat Geralt with respect, and it usually comes in the form of gratitude after saving them from like a life or death situation, and so they get to know him a little bit more, but it's also sort of out of respect for the fact that, he saved their life, basically. Throughout the book, Geralt develops relationships with others that become kind of like the main cast of the Witcher series, and sort of the main ones that I think will sort of go throughout the series are Yennefer, Dandelion and Ciri. Those are the ones that are sort of more prevalent throughout the first two books, although there are a couple of other relationships throughout this book that he does get himself into, but they're not sort of long-term things, and I won't really go into those. But I think what I'm getting at is that although Geralt can sometimes seem like a lone wolf, and that he sort of travels alone, just killing monsters, just doing his day-to-day thing, and he's definitely not one for suffering fools, aside from maybe Dandelion, who does his head in to no end. He does have a very close relationship with a select few people, and they are like a very sort of tight group of people, but he does have those close relationships. And one of the things that I really love about this book is that they are all different, and he reacts to different people in different ways. So just to quickly talk about some of the other characters. First of all, you've got Dandelion, who in the Witcher TV series is called Jaskier. I think that was the original name for him. Dandelion's a pretty renowned bard, and I think he thinks he's probably more renowned than he actually is. He's a bit of a ladies' man and things like that. He's very emotional, very melodramatic, and Geralt sort of hates all of that stuff, but at the same time he sort of can't help it. He can't help but love Dandelion as a friend, and it's kind of weird, their relationship, because they shouldn't work really, because they are polar opposites, but they say opposites attract, so perhaps that's sort of this sort of situation with them. But what I love about their relationship is that although Dandelion can do Geralt's head in a lot of the time, they get along so well, and when things get serious, like Geralt's always got Dandelion's back. Yennefer is basically Geralt's love interest, and she definitely comes across as cold but pragmatic. She doesn't take crap from anybody, and she does have moments where she sort of does show some weakness and lets her guard down, and I think that makes her feel like a real person. Like, she has her weaknesses, she's not one-dimensional, which she, with her type of character, she very much could be. In this book, I feel like Yennefer is deeper than that. She is a strong woman, but she also has those weaknesses as well. And I feel that, like, because she's so, like, determined to be independent, sometimes I think it feels like she's trying too hard to be that, and when you do see sort of these weaknesses creep in, I feel like that has a bigger impact. And then finally, Ciri, as I said before, she has quite a close tie to Geralt due to events that happen in The Last Wish, and I won't go too much into that here, but within this book, Ciri is a bit of a brat. She's quite young, and she doesn't really know too much about the world that she's in, and Geralt will sort of tease her quite a lot. and but also at the same time sort of mentor and teacher as well, all without her knowing. And it's brilliant to watch because yeah, their relationship is just so sweet. I think Geralt and Ciri's relationship is probably one of my favourite parts of this book in particular. I really look forward to seeing more of it within Blood of Elves. I just think it's a shame that there's not more of it. Writing style and prose. Sapkowski's prose, or rather the translated version of his prose, never gets too complex, and I often feel frustrated when reading a book if I keep on having to stop to Google a word every now and then. And I've never not had to do that, but in this book I very rarely needed to. But that's not to say it's too simplistic either. The prose in this book, and the same for The Last Wish as well, manages to be elegant but without needing to use overly fancy language. When it comes to the length of the book, it comes in at just shy of 400 pages, but never once did it feel like that long due to the way that Sapkowski segments the book. It's not your traditional fantasy novel setup with a beginning, middle and end. Much like The Last Wish, it's a series of short stories with a couple that have connection, which are important to the main overall Witcher storyline. The stories are further segmented into shorter chapters, and they tend to average around about 10 pages per chapter, so it keeps it nice and light, and it makes the book as a whole really easy to sort of pick up and put down. It's a really easy read. The stories themselves take place all in the same world with the same cast of characters and stuff, but the stories generally are apart from one another. There are a few that connect up into a story arc, but for the most part they are separate stories. Because the Netflix TV series is based on the first two books, which are just short stories, it's easy to see why people were a little bit confused with the Netflix series, because there are a lot of sort of timelines mixing in together, whereas in the books they are just individual stories, so it never feels like there's sort of like a weird crossover, whereas in the TV series they tried to run multiple of the same of different stories into one episode, so you'd cut from one story to the next and they'd all be in different times, so it was just a bit confusing. I mean, if you watch it a couple of times you sort of start to get sort of what is going on and things like that, and that they are different times, but it's definitely done better in the book, I think. But yeah, I think these books are well worth giving a go, even if you like the TV series or if you don't like the TV series, because there are things that the book does better than the TV series. But even if you like the TV series, it contains extra information. So, you know, if you're hungry for more Witcher, then definitely read these books. So after all of that, what do I think of the book? I think that overall it's a very, very good book. It's a shame about the first couple of short stories, but I don't think they take away from it too much. But I think because I do have a problem with those, I can't give it any more than an 8 out of 10, so I'll give it an 8 out of 10 because I love this book. It's just that those first initial chapters sort of let it down, so yeah. If you've read this book yourself, let me know what you think about it in the comments down below. And otherwise, yeah, let's have a chat about The Witcher. I'd love to make some more friends that talk about it. So yeah, that's my review of The Sword of Destiny. Let me know what you think, and as always, like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one. Bye bye.